Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. President Joe Biden calls Hamas's attack on Israel an act of sheer evil. Says the U.S. stands with Israel, which has, in his words, a right to defend itself. Confirms Americans have been killed and others are being held by Hamas. And that he's working to free them because he says, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world. Coming up, the latest on day 4 of the fighting that has reportedly killed more than 1,000 in Israel and over 800 in Gaza and the West Bank. Here in Washington, D.C., U.S. House Republicans meeting in closed session to hear campaign pitches from the members running for Speaker to fill the post that has been empty since a House vote last week to remove Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But it's unclear whether either of the two frontrunners, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, can get enough Republican votes to win an absolute majority of the full House to be elected Speaker. But the temporary Speaker, Republican Patrick McHenry, says it's his intent for Republicans to elect a new permanent Speaker this week. A story from Reuters: Israeli airstrikes hammered Gaza on Tuesday, razing entire districts and filling morgues with dead Palestinians, as Israel took revenge for the Hamas assault that has triggered some of the worst bloodletting in 75 years of conflict. Across the barrier wall enclosing the coastal enclave, Israeli soldiers collected the last of Israel's dead 4 days after Hamas gunmen rampaged through towns, killing hundreds of people in the deadliest Palestinian militant attack in Israel's history. That reporting from Reuters. President Biden spoke at the White House.
This was an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered, not just killed, slaughtered in Israel. Among them, at least 14 American citizens killed. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children. Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed. Entire families slain. Young people massacred while attending a musical festival to celebrate peace. Women raped, assaulted, paraded as trophies. Families hid their fear for hours and hours, desperately trying to keep their children quiet to avoid drawing attention. And thousands of wounded, alive but carrying with them the bullet holes and the shrapnel wounds and the memory of what they endured. You all know these traumas never go away. There's still so many families desperately waiting to hear the fate of their loved ones, not knowing if they're alive or dead or hostages. Infants in their mother's arms, grandparents in wheelchairs, Holocaust survivors abducted and held hostage. Hostages whom Hamas has now threatened to execute in violation of every code of human morality. It's abhorrent. The brutality of Hamas, these bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism. But sadly, for the Jewish people, it's not new. This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the State of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price.
President Biden at the White House today, standing beside him, the Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. President Biden also talked about the hostages that Hamas says it is holding, including Americans, U.S. military assets sent to the region, and security precautions being taken in the U.S.
We now know that American citizens are among those being held by Hamas. I've directed my team to share intelligence and deploy additional experts from across the United States government to consult with and advise Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery efforts. Because as president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world. The United States has also enhanced our military force posture in the region to strengthen our deterrence. The Department of Defense has moved the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group to the Eastern Mediterranean and bolstered our fighter aircraft presence. And we stand ready to move in additional assets as needed. Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear. Yesterday, I also spoke with the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, and UK to discuss the latest developments with our European allies and coordinate our united response. This comes on top of days of steady engagement with partners across the region. We're also taking steps at home. In cities across the United States of America, police departments have stepped up. Security around centers of Jewish life. The Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are working closely with state and local law enforcement and Jewish community partners to identify and disrupt any domestic threat that could emerge in connection with these horrific attacks. This is a moment for the United States to come together, to grieve with those who are mourning. Let's be real clear. There is no place for hate in America. Not against Jews, not against Muslims, not against anybody. We reject. What we reject is terrorism.
President Biden at the White House. His full remarks run 10 minutes. We covered it live on the C-SPAN networks, and the video is available at cspan.org. Before he came out to speak with reporters, he said he was on the phone with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu the third time in the last couple of days since the attacks by Hamas. The office of the Prime Minister of Israel released a 2-minute video clip of the phone call.
Hello, Joe. Well, it's trying times. We've had better days and we'll have better days with your help too. Mr. President, Joe, I want to thank you for your continued and unequivocal support and the work of your entire administration to support us. The Israeli people were deeply moved by the emotion that Admiral Kirby showed in his interview yesterday. It was deeply moving. And it represented the depth of commitment that you have, your administration have, and the American people across the board have for Israel. Joe, I want to give you a clear picture of the difficult situation we face. We were struck Saturday by an attack whose savagery I can say we have not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, we had hundreds massacred, families wiped out in their beds in their homes, women brutally raped and murdered, over 100 kidnapped, including children. And since we last spoke, the extent of this evil, it's only gotten worse. They took dozens of children, bound them up, burned them, and executed them. They beheaded soldiers. They mowed down these youngsters who came to a nature festival and just, like put 5 jeeps around a depression in the soil, and like Babi Yar, they mowed them down, making sure that they killed everybody. We've never seen such savagery in the history of the state, and they're even worse than ISIS. They're even worse than ISIS, and we need to treat them as such.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a video clip released by his office showing him on the phone speaking with President Biden today. President Biden speaking at the White House saying that he will, when Congress returns, request more aid for Israel, making sure that country does not run out of critical weapons, including the Iron Dome anti-missile system. President Biden saying when Congress returns, we're going to urge them to take urgent action to fund the security requirements of our partners. He has already asked for $24 billion in emergency aid for Ukraine. And White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was asked at the White House news conference today whether there will be additional money requested specifically for Israel.
Jake, the president has remarks today referred to seeking for assistance for partners, plural. Does that suggest that you've decided strategically to ask Congress for a package that includes both Ukraine aid as well as aid for Israel? And, Chairman McCall suggested even including border and Taiwan money and that. I'm just kind of hoping you could give a state of play of how you guys are thinking about this in your interactions with the Hill.
So I'm not going to get ahead of the president's request and not going to take the place of the OMB director who will present the request that we send up. But the president was very clear today that we will be making a request to the Congress, and it will include a request for funding for support to Israel. And he has also been equally clear that we are going to renew our request to the Congress for aid to Ukraine. What exact form that all takes, that will be worked out and presented by others, not by me. But the notion that we're going to go up and ask for Israel aid and ask for Ukraine aid, that's unequivocal. We are going to do that.
Beyond Iron Dome and ammunition, were there any other requests made by Prime Minister Netanyahu today that we can expect to be part of that package?
As I mentioned in my opening comments, he did make specific requests with respect to other capabilities. I'm not going to get into the details of that from this podium, but he and the president discussed that. I spoke with Lloyd Austin, who was on his way to the NATO Defense Ministerial, about those requests. Secretary Austin is following up on that. And as I said in my opening comments, you can expect to see American planes flying into Israel to deliver military capabilities to support Israel. Yeah.
Just a follow-up on Iron Dome. How effective has it been in deterring the attacks? And I know you mentioned this a bit in terms of the interceptors, but has Israel asked for interceptors on an ongoing basis in light of the situation?
You ask how effective it has been in deterring. I can't say that it is deterred, obviously, because a huge number of rockets have fired, but it has been effective, as it typically is, in taking a lot of those rockets out of the sky and saving countless lives by doing so. Now, of course, some rockets have gotten through to tragic cost, and that has been the pattern we have seen in previous conflicts as well. Now, Israel will have an ongoing need for interceptors, because an air defense system is only as good as your ability to continue to put interceptors in that can take out the rockets that are coming to kill civilians and rain down terror on cities. And we are committed to making sure that we are working with Israel to produce and supply the requisite number of Iron Dome interceptors so that they can keep those systems going on an indefinite basis going forward, because we cannot say how long this will be going on.
Jake Sullivan is the National Security Advisor at the White House with reporters today in the White House briefing room. The office of the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrats from New York, putting out a statement today that reads, following very productive meetings in China, including with President Xi, and in light of the tragic events unfolding in Israel, the bipartisan members of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's congressional delegation are moving up their meeting with South Korean President Yoon to Wednesday and will return to the U.S. on Thursday. Leader Schumer will be back in New York Thursday evening. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Matt Miller announcing today that Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be traveling to Israel soon.
I'd like to announce that Secretary Blinken will be traveling to Israel in the coming days to engage our Israeli partners directly about the situation on the ground and how we can continue to best support them in their fight against the terrorists who launched these horrific attacks. Our support for Israel is unwavering, and the Secretary looks forward to meeting with senior leaders in the Israeli government and continuing the discussions he and the President have been having with them since the initial attacks on Saturday. And with that, Matt.
In the coming days, you want to be more specific?
Our expectation is that we will leave tomorrow and arrive in Israel on Thursday.
State Department spokesperson Matt Miller with Associated Press reporter Matt Lee today at the State Department. President Biden mentioning during his remarks at the White House about security measures being taken in the United States to make sure that there's no violence here related to what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. The New York City Mayor Eric Adams at a news conference said law enforcement will also be monitoring social media sites for threats against religious communities, including from so-called lone wolves, those radicalized by not directly affiliated with any group, and that they will be patrolling and watching the actual facilities.
Our meetings with our synagogues, we're going to clearly, number one, they should designate a security team or personnel within the synagogues to do perimeter search and views, observations. If someone is hanging around a synagogue, or you see someone within the community that is suspicious, see something, say something, do something. This is an important time. If you have a law enforcement person who's assigned to your synagogue or attend your synagogue, they should be positioned enough to observe what's going on inside. This is really an opportunity. We have to be high alert. We cannot let our guards down. We cannot believe that it happened thousands of miles away in Israel. We're the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, and we want our synagogues, our personnel to be extremely conscious, and that's what we're telling our commanders, where we have a large Jewish population or those large targets like 770 on Eastern Parkway. That's a significant area where the Lubavitch community is well known, and we want to educate not only what police are doing, but we want to empower our synagogues to also be part of the eyes and ears.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams at a news conference today with law enforcement in New York City. This is Washington Today. Another story from Reuters. Tehran was not involved in the militant Hamas group's weekend attack on Israel, Iran's top authority, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said on Tuesday, but hailed what he called Israel's irreparable military and intelligence defeat. Khamenei said, "We kiss the hands of those who planned the attack on the Zionist regime. The Zionist regime's own actions are to blame for this disaster." And the Reuters article notes that he was wearing a Palestinian scarf in his first televised speech since the attack. Ehud Yaari is an Israeli journalist and political commentator and a fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He took part remotely from Jerusalem today in an institute discussion about what's going on. He says he believes Iran was behind this.
Why were the intelligence chiefs so wrong? Because since 2009, they came to believe it works. We allow Gazan workers to come to Israel. We provide fuel and Qatari money and etc. And they were married to this, again, 73 conceptions. So when the Hamas, facing Israeli technological superiority, undoubtful, came over the fence with motorized gliders and tractors, etc., there was nobody to stop them. And the distance between the fence and the 22, 23 kibbutzim and 11 army positions is very short. It was not just 2 battalion commandos of Hamas that crossed. Probably the only 2 battalion commandos they have. There were many Gazans coming to plunder. And on the way, they took with them some hostages. That's the scene. And it took hours to intervene. We had girl soldiers there, manning the positions that watch the monitor the cameras and the sensors along the fence. At least 24 of them were butchered in their position because there was no buffer. That's something which is very difficult for any Israeli to accept and understand. Now, less emotional. I beg everybody's pardon. I believe, and I don't have the proof yet, I will have it. This was orchestrated by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards through the visits of the Quds Force Commander, General Ismail Khani, to Beirut and Damascus, and their visits to Tehran, etc., in order to derail progress towards an Israeli-Saudi normalization. The Iranians perceive a move in this direction as a direct, serious threat. They did not want to take it.
Ehud Yahari is with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, a fellow joining a virtual panel discussion on the attacks from Jerusalem. You can find the full video of the entire panel discussion at our website at cspan.org. Associated Press reporting from Jerusalem this way: Israeli warplanes hammered the Gaza Strip neighborhood by neighborhood on Tuesday, reducing buildings to rubble and sending people scrambling to find safety in the tiny, sealed-off territory now suffering severe retaliation for the deadly weekend attack by Hamas militants. Humanitarian organizations pleaded for the creation of corridors to get aid into Gaza, warning that hospitals overwhelmed with wounded were running out of supplies. Israel has stopped entry of food, fuel, and medicines into Gaza, and the sole remaining access from Egypt shut down Tuesday after airstrikes hit the border crossing. The war, which has already claimed at least 1,800 lives on both sides, is only expected to escalate. That's Associated Press reporting out of Jerusalem. The fighting in Gaza and Israel has been a topic on the 2024 U.S. presidential election campaign trail. Several Republican candidates talking about it the past couple of days. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, today was at the shul at Baal Haber in Surfside, Florida.
You're going to start hearing, maybe in days, but certainly weeks, you're going to start hearing people say that Israel is now to blame, that Israel is acting disproportionately. The United Nations may even do something. Americans need to stand firm. There is no moral equivalence between Israel defending itself and Hamas terrorists committing atrocities against civilians. And you can count on us here in Florida to be very clear about right and about wrong. This was, over the weekend, the largest number of Jewish civilians killed in a single day since the Holocaust. My wife and I are praying for the families of those killed and missing, particularly the at least 11 American citizens that have already been reported to be killed, and we fear it could be many more, and we do fear that there are Americans that could potentially be being held hostage right now. We too pray for the family of IDF Captain Abraham Hankin in North Miami Beach, who was killed in battle against Hamas terrorists Saturday night. And we pray for the several dozen Florida residents who have since returned to Israel to fulfill their commitment to Israel's armed forces in defense of what needs to be done.
Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis, also Florida governor, at a synagogue in Surfside, Florida today. He announced that Florida would be increasing sanctions against Iranian businesses. Nikki Haley, another Republican running for president, she's also a former South Carolina governor and U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, was in Ida Grove, Iowa on Monday.
Every one of us should have a heavy heart for what's happening in Israel right now. If you look at what has been allowed to have happen, just take a moment to think of the life of an Israeli today. They had just finished their quiet time, Shabbat. They were celebrating peace. They were celebrating the new year. They were having time with their families. And they woke up to people invading their homes, murdering families, taking kids from a concert, dragging them down the streets. Hostages of elderly, women and children taken. And what are they doing? Let me tell you what Hamas did. They went into the streets and celebrated, saying, "Death to Israel, death to America." Think about that. Death to Israel, death to America. The Iranian regime hates us. You don't give money to a regime that hates America. I was on Meet the Press yesterday, and Secretary Blinken went on before me. And I was sitting in the chair listening to what he was saying. And he said, that $6 billion is going to humanitarian efforts. I dealt with the Iranians. I dealt with everything that happened with Israel when I was at the United Nations. It is a shell game the way they move money around. So that $6 billion that you just gave to them opened up $6 billion for them to spend in terrorist activity. But not only that, what did the Biden administration do? They loosened all the sanctions. So much more than that has gone to the Iranian regime. And who does Iran send it to? Hamas? Hezbollah? The Houthis? It's all going to terrorists. And now we're seeing Israel shaken in the way we were shaken on 9/11, with so many of their friends and loved ones that have died. And now they're sending their sons and daughters to fight in a war.
Nikki Haley in Ida Grove, Iowa on Monday. Iowa will be holding the first Republican presidential caucuses early next year. Donald Trump, former president and now presidential candidate, held a rally on Monday in Wolfsboro, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the state that will be holding the first Republican presidential primaries in 2024. Donald Trump also talking about Israel, Hamas, and Iran.
When I was your president, we had peace through strength, and now we have weakness, conflict, and chaos. The atrocities we're witnessing in Israel would never have happened if I was president, would never have ever happened. When I was commander-in-chief, we reduced the Iranian economy, and I withdrew from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, imposed the toughest ever sanctions on the regime, and imposed a strict travel ban to keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of our country. Now they're pouring into our country. They're pouring into our country. Joe Biden undid it. He undid it all and gave billions and billions of dollars to the world's top sponsor of terror, tossing Israel to the bloodthirsty terrorists and jihadists. You saw that just recently. Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, he's another beauty, bragged to this is like a couple of days ago, like yesterday. He bragged to a foreign policy audience, quote, "The Middle East region is quieter today than it's been in 2 decades. Oh, how's that working out? They just attacked Israel. And it's been a hotbed beyond that, even beyond that. This war happened for 3 reasons. The allowing by the Biden administration of Iran to sell massive amounts of oil, making $60 billion a year. People don't talk about that. They talk about the $6 billion. But they gave them $6 billion in ransom money. We got 6, they got 6. We got 5, they got 5. But then what happened is they also got $6 billion. So we got 5, and they got 5. And on top of the 5, they got $6 billion. Somehow, that's not a good deal. And our country has perceived weakness with an incompetent and corrupt leader, Joe Biden, who's laughed at all over the world. And Joe Biden betrayed Israel. You know, when I see Bibi Netanyahu come and he tries to talk them into doing something, they never do it. They never do it. It's a real problem. I can't imagine how anybody who's Jewish or anybody who loves Israel, and frankly, the evangelicals love Israel. I can't imagine anybody voting Democrat, let alone for this man who's totally. He was shot 30 years ago. He's more shot now.
Donald Trump in Wolfsboro, New Hampshire on Monday, part of C-SPAN's Campaign 2024 coverage. Another presidential candidate, Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, who's ranking member on the Banking Committee, released a statement after the attack on Israel calling for the committee to hold a hearing with Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen and for a Senate investigation into the release of the $6 billion to Iran. Senator Scott writing, "In the face of evil, we must use every tool, weapon, and economic sanction available to provide for our nation's security and the security of Israel." President Biden put out a joint statement on Monday with the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom expressing their, quote, steadfast and united support to the state of Israel and our unequivocal condemnation of Hamas and its appalling acts of terrorism. Great Britain has been holding their political party conferences the past couple of weeks. Today, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, in a speech in Liverpool, gave support to Israel.
Conference, I am shocked and appalled by the events in Israel. I utterly condemn the senseless murder of men, women and children, including British citizens, in cold blood by the terrorists of Hamas. This party believes in the two-state solution, a Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. But this action by Hamas does nothing for Palestinians, and Israel must always have the right to defend her people.
The British Labour Party leader Keir Starmer at the Labour Party conference today in Liverpool. The ruling Conservative Party in Great Britain, led by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, held its party conference last week in Manchester, England. We spoke with C-SPAN's London producer Peter Knowles about the two leading British parties' positions when it comes to Israel and Hamas.
On the Hamas question, this is an area of potential difficulty for Labour because we're just emerged from a period where the previous leadership was accused of a degree of an element of anti-Semitism. And there are an awful lot of fiercely strong pro-Palestinian supporters among the Labour ranks. So it's interesting to see what happened at the conference. The Labour leadership have been absolutely adamant that the only thing they're going to say on the matter is that they support Israel and its right to self-defence. So they have positioned themselves as being in the same place as the Conservative government, albeit, of course, with references to their desire for long-term, peaceful, just solutions to the needs of all the peoples of the region. But that puts the leadership in a slightly different place from a lot of the membership. And I witnessed some minor tussles going on, and there have been some bigger tussles between pro-Palestinian protesters outside the conference and people who think their stance right now is absolutely outrageous. But the leadership are really clear-cut that this is an appalling terror attack on Israel, and Israel should be backed in its self-defense.
C-SPAN's producer in London, Peter Knowles, on a phone call. This from the BBC. More than 10 British citizens are feared dead or missing after the Hamas attack on Israel, an official UK source has told the BBC. The victims include a 20-year-old soldier and a Scottish grandfather. The UK government believes up to 60,000 British nationals are in Israel or Gaza. It has said it isn't assisting families, but no evacuation is planned. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Story from ABC News. House Republicans are bracing for what could be a divided and drawn-out speaker's fight this week as they appear to struggle to unify behind one candidate. The GOP conference will meet late Tuesday to hear from the two candidates running to be Speaker of the House, Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. Republicans are facing increased pressure to coalesce around one candidate quickly so the House can provide aid to Israel after the Hamas-led attacks have left hundreds of Israelis dead in the most devastating assault on Israel in 5 decades. That from ABC News. The House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, posted on X about the format of the closed session. She writes, this evening, the House Republican Conference will host a candidate forum for GOP members to hear from Speaker of the House declared candidates. Each declared candidate for Speaker will have 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by a Q&A session with members, and concluding with a 2-minute closing statement. I look forward to hosting a productive session to ensure we focus on delivering for the American people. That was the post from the conference chair of the House Republicans, Elise Stefanik. One of the declared candidates, Steve Scalise, spoke to reporters as he went in.
Good to see all you. Looking forward to going in and talking to our conference about the direction of our country, getting our House back open. We need to get Congress back to work. We're going to do that tomorrow. We're going to elect a new speaker and get back to work for the American people. There's a lot of work to do.
You're confident there's a vote tomorrow?
Yes.
Congressman Steve Scalise heading into the Tuesday night closed session of House Republicans. C-SPAN spoke this morning with CQ roll call reporter Aidan Quigley about the contest between Congressman Scalise and Congressman Jim Jordan.
There are public endorsements where Jordan has a slight edge at this point, but the conference is, pretty big, 221 members at last count, and there's less than half have endorsed either candidate. But Jordan does have a lot of support from members of the House Freedom Caucus and members of the Ohio delegation so far, which is giving him a slight edge over Scalise, who kind of has a little bit of a wider base across the conference.
How many votes do they need to become Speaker, and do either one of these gentlemen have them?
So to become Speaker on the floor, they will need 217 votes, which is a really high bar, as we saw with the McCarthy situation. To become the nominee for Speaker in the Republican conference, you need 111 votes, which is half of the conference. And in the two-man race, presumably, one of them would be able to get there on Wednesday morning. That said, there are some wrinkles here. The first one is that some in the conference are trying to change the conference rules to require 217 to move to the floor. So that would kind of draw this out, in my opinion. I think there's definitely neither of them is close to 217 at this point. So that would take a little longer. And the second is, as I mentioned earlier, that's a high 217 is a high bar.
Why do some want to get to 217 behind closed doors before they take that vote to the in public on the House floor?
So the big argument there is basically they want to avoid what happened in January. We were all watching as vote after vote after vote went on and on and on, and McCarthy couldn't become Speaker, which led to him negotiating with the holdouts. Which, if you kind of look at the course of the year, he made the deal that included giving them the one-person motion to vacate. Only took one person to bring that to the floor. And as we saw last week, he got ousted in part because of that rule change, which he had to make to become Speaker. So I think Republicans just want to kind of avoid, a repeat of January.
Will this vote take place Wednesday?
So the internal Republican conference vote, I would guess, would take place on Wednesday. At least it would start on Wednesday. Whether or not we see a vote on the floor on Wednesday is a lot more questionable. Neither candidate right now seems to have, close to 217. So it might take a little bit to get them to that number.
As we noted at the top, some in the party feel like they need to move more quickly because the House cannot act and you've got this conflict in the Middle East. Why can't the House act?
So without a Speaker in place, there are some constitutional questions about the power of the Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry, who was, the name that McCarthy wrote down on the list for continuation of government reasons. There's definitely a debate, though. There are some people who believe that he can act. Well, there are others who say that constitutionally the only thing he can do is, including the House Democrats, who say the only thing he can do is move towards a Speaker election. But basically, Republicans coming out of yesterday's meeting were really straightforward in the fact that they need, they're pushing for an Israel aid package that might include Ukraine and border money and a couple of other things, but they want to get back on track. They want to get back to the appropriations bills. There's a lot for Congress to do, and they really want to elect a new speaker quickly. However, that's likely easier said than done, as we've seen a lot of conflict in the Republican conference this year.
CQ Roll Call reporter Aidan Quigley on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. The House Republican Conference meeting for the Speaker Candidates Forum tonight. Reports are that House Republicans will meet Wednesday to vote amongst themselves on nominating a candidate for Speaker. And as for when a vote of the full House to elect a new Speaker could take place, the earliest that could happen is Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Today, Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, presided over a brief pro forma House session, which is the opening prayer, Pledge of Allegiance, and then adjournment until Wednesday.
The House will come to order. The prayer will be offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? This morning, O God, keenly aware of the violence and turmoil in Israel and throughout the Middle East, we pray with the psalmist who wrote, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of our families and friends, we will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, we will seek your good. Lord, in your mercy, for the people of Israel, for the people in Gaza, in your mercy, hear our prayers. Amen."
Amen. The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. And pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin to offer the pledge.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Without objection, when the House adjourns today, it adjourns to meet at 3 p.m. tomorrow. And without objection, the House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. tomorrow.
The House Speaker Pro Tem Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, presiding over today's pro forma House session. No legislative business conducted. From NBC News, they report that Patrick McHenry declined to speak with reporters after leaving the chamber. He was spotted in an unusual area as he left the building, a staircase by the Speaker's lobby, where video is restricted that differs from the route that former Speaker Kevin McCarthy would take. McHenry said when he was asked if there would be a speaker elected by the end of the week, that's the goal. And he also commented on the casualties of the Israel-Hamas war, saying they're in my prayers, and if we need to act as a government, we will. And from the House Foreign Affairs Committee, there's this. Today, the committee chair, Michael McCall, Republican from Texas, and ranking member Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, joined by 390 of their colleagues, introduced a bipartisan resolution standing with Israel as it defends itself against the barbaric war launched by Hamas and other terrorists and condemning Hamas's brutal war against Israel. That's the news report, the press release from the committee. Whenever a speaker is elected, that resolution could be one of the first pieces of legislation brought up for debate and a vote. But again, House Republicans meeting in closed session tonight to hear from the declared candidates for Speaker and to ask them questions. House Republicans also met privately Monday night talking about the Speaker's race and proposed House rules changes, including modifying how many members it takes to trigger a vote on the motion to vacate the Speaker's chair. That was used by a single Republican, Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, to remove former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, also a Republican. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, spoke to reporters outside the meeting room Monday night about how close the election is to replace Speaker McCarthy.
There is no consensus on any specific individual that you want to lead you or any way that the rules around that would change?
No, there's a group that are still aligned with Kevin McCarthy and would like to bring him back as Speaker. There's a number supporting Jim Jordan. There's a number supporting Steve Scalise. But this conference was not set up to come together for a Speaker. This one was set up to more of a discussion to try to figure out and solve problems going forward.
What do you think Wednesday is unrealistic to come to an agreement on who should be Speaker? Do you think Wednesday is unrealistic as a timeline to come to an agreement on Speaker?
I think that what's realistic is that we control the majority in Congress, and we have to lead. And I think that's what we need to do.
What do you make of McCarthy leaving the door open to a potential comeback bid as Speaker?
Well, he was widely supported. There was only 8 Republicans that didn't support him last week, so I think that's a wise move to leave the door open.
Does it make it more difficult to coalesce around one candidate for Speaker, given that that's 3 choices instead of 2?
I think everything's difficult right now, to be honest with you. I don't know how to answer that question any other way. This is unprecedented. It's certainly something new. But I was glad to sit and listen to everyone's different thoughts, opinions, ideas, and how to go forward, and especially hearing everyone's shared concern for Israel and shared concern for our own border and the dangers that we all could have as a nation.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, Monday night as House Republicans met to discuss the Speaker's race. They're back again tonight, Tuesday night, to meet in closed session and hear from the candidates themselves. Outside the room tonight, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy said this.
McCarthy, do you expect there to be a vote this week?
I expect there to be a vote and elect a new Speaker this week. I asked them in there. I know a lot of them want to nominate me. I told them, please do not nominate me. We said a prayer for Israel.
That's former Speaker Kevin McCarthy outside the room tonight. We'll keep you updated on the race for Speaker on the C-SPAN networks. Wall Street today, the Dow up 134, NASDAQ up 78, S&P up 22. From the Atlanta Journal-Constitution this week, by shifting its focus from consumers to workers, American trade policy is now a near explicit rejection of the free trade deals of the 1980s, the Biden administration's top trade official said in an interview on Friday. Although those earlier deals, especially the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, were aggressively promoted by a previous Democratic president, Bill Clinton, the current administration believes they bled out manufacturing jobs, said U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai. Efficiency and corporate profits came at the expense of workers, she said, speaking to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution after a visit to a Siemens facility in Gwinnett that works on technology for electric vehicles. Katherine Tai was back in Washington today at the Center for American Progress talking about this approach to trade.
At its core, our worker-centered trade policy is about people. The economy is more than numbers. It is people. So our economic policy must work for our people. Our work to implement and enforce the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement exemplifies this belief. Trade tools are not trophies to be admired on shelves. They are living arrangements between dynamic economies and are meant to be used and put to the test. And that is exactly what we are doing. We are actively working with Mexico to advance labor cases through the USMCA's rapid response mechanism to make sure that this agreement helps drive a race to the top. About 90% of the cases have been in the auto sector, and we are seeing real change and success for workers and independent unions in Mexico. New collective bargaining agreements, major salary increases, safer working conditions. This is having a real impact on working people's lives, not only in Mexico, but also here at home, because elevating labor standards in Mexico empowers U.S. workers by reducing unfair incentives to ship jobs overseas. In our most recent actions, we are pushing further forward into the procedures laid out in this mechanism, as you saw in our request for a panel in the San Martin mine case. We are committed to using every enforcement tool at our disposal to safeguard workers' rights and across the board.
The United States Trade Representative Katherine Tai today at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.